tonight, you'll get a copy of the prints. After tonight, you'll be sent a copy of the presentation, but also the video, which we're quite happy for you to share within your own organisation, but please don't share it outside. This is an introduction, but remember, CAN is here for the long term, so it isn't just a sort of one-stop shop, one hit. So if your organisation needs some individual advice and support, then you come to me. If you're based in BCP, or Becky, who was doing the roll call, if you're based within the Dorset Council area. Okay, so starting off, if you don't know who CAN is, so we're a local charity that supports the local voluntary and community sector across Dorset and BCP. And we do this in three sort of ways, by empowering the voluntary sector, which is mostly through advice and support to individual organisations, through people like myself and Becky, but also by putting on training and webinars, etc. Enabling volunteering, so that's encouraging people to volunteer, giving advice and support to organisations about good practice on volunteering, and matching up people who are looking to volunteer for those of you who are looking for volunteers, and then connecting communities, which is about bringing the sector together, sharing with each other. We have a number of networks that do that. Look at those on our website, but also we try to project a voice, particularly to the statutory sector. So if you want to know more about CAN, then look on our website. So this is me. After tonight, if you do have any questions or queries, then you can contact me by email. If you want to get hold of me by phone, best to use the mobile rather than the office number, because all you'll be able to do is leave a message, whereas at least with the mobile, you might be able to get me direct on the phone to talk. Okay, so you're all charities. Probably quite a lot of you are trustees as well. As I said at the beginning, probably even tonight, there's a broad range of the sorts of organisations in terms of size and what you do. But fundamentally, what charities are about and what is that set out in this law is that we exist to make a positive difference. And the charity speak is public benefit. And if you've been around for a while, the Charity Commission at one time used to say, well, actually, everything that a charity does needs to make a positive, net positive benefit to the community. So you used to have to think about, well, what risks or dangers of your operations, and then sort of try and balance that off against any of the positives. They don't tend to talk about that now, but I think it's useful to think about that, because that's where this issue of safeguarding has come up for the charity world. Is it's still based on that actually the work of a charity could put people at risk, and you need to balance that against any of the positive benefits that are being created. Now, this is where you might need to get your head around this. What the Charity Commission for England and Wales talks about safeguarding is different from how people talk about safeguarding in other places. Now, usually when you talk about safeguarding, you're talking about under 18s, children and young people, and adults at risk. What the Charity Commission and the other two regulators in Scotland and Northern Ireland did in 2019 was actually to say, no, safeguarding is about protecting anyone who comes into contact with a charity. This all sort of bubbled up because there were a couple of scandals, particularly in overseas development charities, about potentially workers abusing their positions, and actually not potential. Well, I suppose actually putting people at risk. It was particularly in Haiti, was the big one with Oxfam, and the use of prostitutes by members of staff. So a big, huge amount in the press. Central government made lots of sort of statements, and the Charity Commission in England and Wales, but also Scotland and Northern Ireland, in 2019 produced this new guidance, safeguarding and protecting people for charities and trustees. And there's a link here. So when you get the presentation, if you click here, it'll go straight to it. So what it says is that, as part of the duty of a trustee is you must take reasonable steps to protect from harm people who come into contact with their charity. And what this means is everyone who comes into contact with your charity. To back this up, a couple of years ago, the Charity Commission started to produce these very good 5-minute reads. If you don't know about them, if you follow the link here, you'll see all of them. And many of them include a little video. And I'm going to start off really by showing you the one that's specifically around safeguarding. So if I go to the next screen. Can everyone hear this?
Protecting people and providing a safe and trusted environment for everyone who comes into contact with your charity can be a big responsibility for trustees. But now, there's an easy way to discover the essentials. The Charity Commission registers and regulates charities in England and Wales. We also provide a range of support for trustees, including a 5-minute guide full of essential advice called Safeguarding People. It's designed to help trustees protect everyone involved with their charity. It emphasises 3 principles, the critical foundation for safeguarding. Firstly, that safeguarding applies to every charity, not just those dealing with children and adults at risk. Secondly, that safeguarding concerns the well-being of every person connected to a charity, not just beneficiaries. And thirdly, that safeguarding is the responsibility of every trustee, not just a designated few. The guide also sets out a 5-point action plan, which covers identifying risks, what policies must be in place, including how to report and manage incidents, and ensuring that necessary checks are completed for everyone. In short, it provides the essentials that every trustee needs to know and get right. Safeguarding is an ongoing concern that trustees must regularly review and update. And the guide signposts you to further support. Trustees must create and maintain a strong...
It's paused, Steve.
Safeguarding culture. One where employees and volunteers, beneficiaries, and everyone involved with the charity is safe and has the confidence to report and manage concerns correctly. Reading Safeguarding People will help ensure that effective safeguarding measures are put in place. Safeguarding is about keeping people safe. And there's nothing more fundamental than that. Take 5 minutes to read the guide and refresh your knowledge today. Protecting people and...
Okay, hopefully that was short and sweet. And we're going to talk about, give you some resources at the end about raising awareness. But if nothing else, I think you should get every single trustee in your charity to at least look at that video. Ideally, also to look at the 5-minute read as well. But I just want to emphasise, the 3 foundations that the Charity Commission expects. That in fact, it says that actually every charity needs to think about their safeguarding responsibilities, even if your charity doesn't work with children or adults at risk. It covers everyone who comes in contact with your charity, not just your beneficiaries or users. Just the Charity Commission does use this term beneficiaries. It's just because not every single charity actually benefits individuals. So it could be the countryside, it could be works of art, it could be animals. So they use the term beneficiaries, but it's your users. And actually, it's the responsibility of every trustee, not just a lead trustee. We'll talk a bit about a lead trustee later on. So who is responsible for safeguarding? Well, hopefully that's come across that basically, sorry, it comes down to you as a trustee. But as anything that happens within a charity, obviously you can delegate it down, but the responsibility remains with the trustee. So you need to make sure that you have adequate checks and balances in place to make sure that actually safeguarding is being carried out across your own organisation, and that you get reports back. Because at the end of the day, like anything else in a charity, that actually if they're not managed adequately, and that actually the Charity Commission recognises that, then they do use this thing about misconduct and mismanagement in the administration of a charity or a breach of trustee duties. And therefore, if they do an investigation, these are the things that they will be looking at. That you have followed suitable policies and procedures. So this is good practice that is out there. And again, we've got some links at the end for you to follow and have a look at. The adequate due diligence was carried out. So I said at the beginning, you need to go away tonight when you start this thinking about safeguarding. You need to think about your own operations within your charity, thinking about risks and who could be at risk and how to minimize those. And that you've adequate oversight. So if you have delegated it, that actually you have put in place checks and balances to make sure that actually your policies and procedures and your culture is being followed. And that actually, if something has gone wrong, someone is at risk, that actually you took the appropriate remedial action, and that will depend on all sorts of things, but it'll be what the Charity Commission sees as a reasonable response. And that actually, if you've got to the point where things have to be reported to the authorities, then that you have done that. But also, and this is sometimes quite often missed out, actually if there is a safeguarding issue that has had to be reported to a regulator of some kind, you should also do a serious incident report to the Charity Commission. It's an online reporting system, but they expect you to have done that as well. So you should have basically an appropriate safeguarding policy, which needs to be appropriate to your charity and the work you do, size and so on. Probably some sort of simple code of conduct, so that actually it sort of distills down what your code of what expected behavior is, and any other safeguarding procedures. Becky.
I just have a question in the chat that I think is quite relevant to what you're just saying, Steve. In the chat, Sue has asked how often, please. Sue, can you just clarify, please put yourself on unmute, to the report to the Commission? Is that what you're asking? Sue Dancy, you've popped in the chat. How often, please? You might need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go.
Okay, sorry, it's irrelevant. It was an answer in the chat, to Dorset Mind, because they said that they do have trustees doing safeguarding training regularly. So I asked them how often, please.
How often training? Well, again, it comes down to the sort of work that you're doing. We're going to talk, we'll mention a bit about training at the end. We hope to put on some sort of course about working with children and adults at risk later on. So this is more about the higher level safeguarding responsibility. Now, some of you and other charities will be working directly with children and adults at risk, and therefore probably need to have a higher level of policies and procedures and think about higher level training. There is no right or wrong answer. It depends.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's not an easy answer, but it does depend. And obviously, like any policy, it needs to be regularly reviewed to ensure they're fit for purpose. Were there any other questions at that point?
Please feel free, guys. Steve can only see whoever's talking, and there's nothing in the chat, Steve, currently.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I have a follow-on question then.
Yep.
Are there levels of training, please? I understand
Yes.
there's level 1, level 2, and so it
Level
would be
3.
nice to know which. Okay.
Yeah.
And where do we find out more about those, please?
Right. Okay. I think what I would say is have a chat. Where are you, Sue? Where are you from?
So-
People Need Nature, based in Poundbury, really.
Oh, okay. Well, then have a conversation with Becky outside the meeting.
And I can signpost you to
Yep.
free training for
Yep.
volunteers.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Becky.
All right. So the Charity Commission is saying it's anybody you have contact with in your charity. So, of course, it's going to be your beneficiary and your users, whoever they may be. And, of course, probably increasingly, you have to think of online dangers as well as face-to-face. Okay. Hopefully, you might have some pen or paper with you. Not going to ask you, but I want you to think about what other types, groups of people come into contact with your charity, your own charity. I'm not going to ask you to share this, but it's a little exercise for you to start thinking about what other groups of people does your charity come into contact with. Just write it down or think about it in your head. Make a little mental list. Do a list on your phone. Right, okay. These are others that I can think of. Obviously, staff and trustees could be quite, and volunteers are going to be regular in contact with your organisation. Contractors, so people who aren't necessarily employed by you, but they're paid somehow to do some work. And it could be, service delivery, but it could obviously be because they've come in to do something on your office or your building. Suppliers of goods and so on will have some contact with you. And actually, it might be through payment. You might not ever have any physical contact with them, but you'll have some. You'll keep their information about them, their contacts. Donors. Did anyone else come up with any categories of people that aren't covered in that list? But can you see where I'm going to is that you have, for this Charity Commission version of safeguarding, you do have to think outside the box of what safeguarding is usually talked about. Okay. Also, start thinking about in what way could those categories of people be harmed? And we're not just talking here about physical harm. In what way could there be a detriment to them? Again, just sort of start noting down different ways that people could suffer some sort of harm or loss. So it's not just physical. Okay. Well, these are the sorts of groups I had. They're the pretty obvious ones that go back to the sort of more restricted or the more usual definition of safeguarding of abuse and harm and all those different types, whether it be sexual, whether it be physical, whether it be emotional, whether it be financial, whether it be psychological, all those different ones that you see on most safeguarding policies that are aimed at children and adults. But there are these other ones that relate to that wider definition. So you've got health and safety of those that come in contact with the organisation, and we're obviously talking about physical and psychological safety. You know, if you've been following stuff that comes out from the health and safety executive, they've obviously been talking a lot more in the last couple of years around mental health issues that can relate about being in the workplace. Obviously, financial loss, and that could be, for instance, your suppliers. You know, financial loss to your donors. Then the whole issue about fundraising, and again, there have been scandals or investigations in the past of where, for instance, and this tends to be the professional fundraising profit-making organisations, perhaps using over-the-top techniques to get people to sign up to regular giving. So now the sort of fundraising code does talk about, actually, you know, you must allow cool-off periods, and particularly if you're starting to deal with people who may be more vulnerable, actually not pressurizing them to sign up. The whole thing about you know, loss of privacy, confidentiality, that could happen as a result of a contact with someone with your organization, abusing a position of trust. And that again is where, you know, look, and that links perhaps to bullying and harassment is usually quite often where there has been an abuse of a position of trust that results in some people being bullied and harassed. Whole thing about cyber loss, you know, charities are just as likely, maybe even slightly more likely, to be the victims of cyber attacks, and therefore people's information could be lost. Then there's this whole thing, which I will talk a bit about every now and again, about the charities culture, which may allow poor behaviour and poor accountability. Again, you know, that could result in some sort of abuse and harm, or it could be mental stress and so on. And then the whole issue of discrimination, and therefore you need to think about actually whether there is, you know, sort of direct discrimination, or where the culture of an organisation may end up in indirect discrimination, and people actually feeling that they are being abused or taken advantage of, or not being treated in the same way as others without a particular characteristic. Did anyone else come up with any sort of other types of harm? This is not a definitive list. No? Okay. Did anybody want to ask me that? Any other questions at that point?
Nothing in the chat, Steve.
Sorry?
There's nothing in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay, great. I'll move on then. So as part of that 5-minute guide, and also in the Charity Commission longer guidance, when you go to the website, web page, there is also this little infographic about the 10 actions that charities should take. So I'm going to sort of quickly whiz my way through this and point out a few things. Oh, what's that? Oh.
You okay? We can see it fine.
Right. Okay. Actions for trustees. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yep. So the first one is actions for trustees 1. Right. Basically, it's to make sure you've got an adequate safeguarding policy, code of conduct, and any other safeguarding procedures, and regularly review and update them. So you saw this earlier on. So this is the sort of first one you have to think about. Now, like any policies and procedures, you have to individualize it to your own organization. Becky and I quite often, well, in fact, we're asked for templates for policies and procedures. We give it to people, but we say, use this as a sort of a model to base your structure on, or something to think about what should be and shouldn't be in there. But you really do need to individualize any policy and procedure for your own organization. So this is the first one that the Charity Commission talks about. And you have to keep them up to date, and therefore approve a schedule. So a general safeguarding policy you might think about every couple of years, whereas if you are working with adults at risk or children and young people, probably looking at that policy every year is seen as good practice. What also should trigger that is if there's a change of activity, so a risk has suddenly gone perhaps up the ladder that's more likely to happen, and therefore you might need to review that particular policy or procedure. Or it could be the change of staff sometimes could result in you thinking about a change of your policy or procedure. Here are some possible policies. So you might want an overall policy. So can we have one called Keeping Everyone Safe, which details the Charity Commission expectation about keeping everyone safe who comes into contact with your charity, so not just adults and children and young people. And I think for some small charities that don't work with children or adults at risk, then probably just having a simple Keeping Everyone Safe one, which gives the charity a sort of statement, that we will keep everyone safe and this is the way we'll do it. Again, come and talk to Becky and I if you want to look at a sort of overarching Keeping Everyone Safe. Now, as I said before, if you are working with children and or with adults at risk, you're going to need a very specific policy for that. But most of you, any charity, will probably need the following to basically, tick off those other risks that there might be. So a health and safety policy and procedure, data protection, confidentiality, financial control, so that people aren't going to be out of pocket because of fraud or because of wrong payments being made. If you're engaging in a lot of fundraising, particularly with individuals, then you're probably going to need to have a fundraising policy that follows the fundraising code. One of those harms I talked about was about discrimination, so you should have a EDI type policy. Then recruitment, employment and volunteering. Again, when you look at that, some of those elements are there about protecting the legal rights, but also maybe your moral rights as an employer or as a volunteering involving organization, so that actually you're not taking advantage of your staff and volunteers. Safer recruitment might be a sub policy of the recruitment. Now that's where you are again working with children and with adults at risk. And there's some basic rules you can follow to tick the box about safer recruitment. Then you might have a training policy, and that's where you might detail the sort of training you will offer on safeguarding at different levels. We talked about that earlier. It's going to depend on your own organization. It might just be that everyone just needs to have some basic awareness of what safeguarding is and what to look out for and what to do if they notice anything, and code of conduct around expected behavior. The other two are sort of more outward looking. This is to show that you actually are going to respond to I guess outside people noticing that something's not going correct, not going right. So having a good complaints policy so that people feel that they are at risk or have been harmed in some way, that they are clear about how they can make a complaint and how you will deal with it. And then the whistleblowing has become really, really important in terms of safeguarding. If you look at all the recent cases about where things have gone wrong, it's usually because people knew or suspected but kept stum. Jimmy Savile has been the sort of most sort of cause célèbre in the last few years that people were concerned, but because of his position and stuff like that, nobody spoke out. So whistleblowing is seen now as a sort of a must-have type policy for all charities. So allowing people to basically go around the chain of command or find other ways that they can actually report an issue that they're concerned or worried about. So the second one for action of trustees, identify those risks and look for new risks on the horizon. Now, keep up to date with that. If you're CAN members, you'll get stuff like Know Your Stuff on a Thursday, and maybe on the other mailings as well, that might start to make you think about, actually, maybe we need to start thinking about this particular risk, like around cyber attacks, or perhaps changes in data protection legislation or data protection, things that are happening out there in the real world or in health and safety and so on, that might make you think, oh, actually, maybe we need to think about making sure we've included this in our policies and procedures. There you go. And then you can sign up for, we get our stuff. So Know Your Stuff comes from things like the Information Commissioner's Office and Ofsted and HMRC and the Fundraising Regulator. But, larger organizations, rather than relying on us to sort of filter out it, maybe you can sign up for those newsletters and alerts that they put out. The third action is consider how to improve the safeguarding culture within your charity. When you look at safeguarding, what's been increasingly felt is it needs to be a culture, that it needs to be shown that, we as charities are there to make a positive difference, public benefit, and therefore we need to make sure we look after people within the charity and those people that we're working with. So you should have, these important sort of principles, treating others with respect, and not so harming people is wrong. A listening culture, listen to people, particularly when they are saying, well, this isn't quite right, and picking up on those, perhaps those little cues that actually maybe something isn't quite right here, and then exploring that with them. And then an open culture that holds everyone to account, so that people don't feel that we shouldn't whistleblow on our friends and our workmates and our volunteers and so on. The codes of conduct that quite explicitly set out the way that you should and shouldn't behave and encourage speaking up. And then obviously there needs to be probably a regular discussion at a board. And again, it will depend on the type of charity you are and what you do. But I think all charities at least once a year should have, safeguarding on their agenda. Down at the other end, if your charity is working regularly with children and adults at risk, then it should be a standing item on every board meeting. At least that you start thinking and ask the questions. Nothing to report, that's fine, but at least there's something reminder there for you to think about it. Fourth action is that everyone knows about the charity's commitment to protecting everyone and how to report and record and refer a safeguarding concern. So that's thinking about induction. So induction of your trustees, your volunteers, your staff. When they first start with the organisation, there probably ought to be something around safeguarding. You need to have good policies that everyone can follow, that they know where they are. But sometimes policies can be quite big, a bit tome-like. So you might need to develop sort of good working summaries that are easily accessible, easy sort of like what to do if. And then appropriate training for staff, depending on the role. And you can go from simple awareness that you get everyone to do through to accredited training like the level 1, 2 or 3. And then you need to promote and publicize that actually, safeguarding is a concern of the organisation and how you go about it. 6, need to evaluate any training, ensuring it's current and relevant. Training moves on. So because somebody did some training a couple of years ago, you might need to look out to see actually whether the training has fundamentally changed. Number 7, this is about if you are working again with under 18s or with adults at risk, then you should think about DBSs. And you can do a check with the Disclosure and Barring Service about actually whether you can do a DBS, what level. Again, this will depend on your charity. You know, if you're not sure, contact me or Becky. And every time that you go do a recruitment, a safer recruitment, you need to reevaluate that role. Okay, you might have thought about this 3 years ago when Sam started, but now that Saeed started, you might want to change. You know, think about, well, actually the role's moved on and changed, and therefore we need to perhaps do a different sort of level of DBS. One thing I would say this here is you must check whether you can DBS or not. You can't do a DBS because you think it's a good idea to do so. You can only do it if it's exempt from the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. And you can do that on the DBS website. They have a checkout that you put in the role, and it will tell you whether you can do a check and actually what level that might be. And there is some quite good guidance from DBS about the sorts of roles that can be DBS'd. One lot of guidance is aimed at adults, and another is aimed at children. Have a risk assessment process for posts that don't qualify for DBS, which still have contact with children and adults at risk. So not everyone who has contact with children or adults at risk will be entitled to a DBS, but you might be able to do a risk assessment, in fact, about actually could because of their role and their contact with those groups, they might be a risk to a child or an adult, or correspondingly, they might be at risk of having an accusation made against them. And so you need to think about actually how to protect both sides, you know, your users, beneficiaries, but also your staff volunteers. Right. An expected behaviour, this code of conduct, is a good example of how you can reduce the risk for all of those concerned. Periodically review your safeguarding policy and learning from any serious incident or near miss. You know, that's how good policies develop, is that actually, you know, whether it's health or safety, whether it's data protection, the same with safeguarding, is that actually, you know, something nearly happened but didn't, rather than just saying, thank God for that, move on. Maybe you need to think about, well, actually, do we need to change our policy or procedure? Do we need to change the sort of training, awareness making that we're using within our organisation? And as I said here, include safeguarding the agenda of any regular meetings. If you have a new return subject warrants comment. Okay. And there are 2 organisations that, if you are working with adults and or with children, then NSPCC have got lots of stuff, and they have a tool that you can use to assess how good your working with children policies are. And similarly, Ancraft have one which actually mostly concentrates on adults, but in fact their tool is for children and adults as well. It's because Ancraft also are funded by the government to give information to sports organisations. So obviously they'll have contact with under 18s to assess your children's and adults policies. I'm not sure any of you work overseas, but this was the 10th one on the Charity Commission one. And, you know, you basically, if you are working overseas, then you need to think of the legal framework in the countries that you are based in. So there's a quick chunter through those 10. Did anybody want any question at that point?
Nothing in the chat, Steve. Ladies and gents, if you do have any questions, do ask.
Okay. as I said, sort of like the current guidance from the Charity Commission did come out from a couple of scandals of overseas development agencies, and Bond is the sort of national umbrella organisation for charities working in overseas development, and they have a very good document which is the hyperlink or entitled Bond. But they set out these sort of 6 things, and you can see it's a different way of saying the same sort of stuff. But actually, their document is quite good if you want something else to read to give you ideas about how to apply safeguarding within your own charity. The other thing where it comes up is the Charity Governance Code, and there's a link there. So this is a sort of non-statutory code developed by a number of national umbrella organisations for the voluntary and community sector. But the Charity Commission basically expects you to follow it, and if you don't, to explain why not. So their principle 3 around integrity, ensuring the right to be safe. This talks about you as trustees need to understand your responsibilities, and where appropriate, having policies and procedures, risk management, and that actually you make everyone aware of those policies, and that you encourage people to speak up and feel comfortable about raising concerns. And it's also picked up in Principle 4, decision making and risk control. Pretty much the same thing. It talks about doing risk management and making sure that you actually have the right policies and procedures in place. Becky.
We just have one question around, would you have individual plans for individuals at risk?
Oh, well, you might do, yes. I think if you felt that actually the needs of an individual, that actually, most policies all end up trying to be generalities. If you feel that you have got users, clients that have got some very individual needs, then maybe, yes, that would be a good idea. But I wouldn't do it just for the sake of doing it. It's, again, where you feel that actually adds something to protecting them from being harmed in some way. Safeguarding roles. So I think every charity ought to have a trustee with safeguarding responsibility. And although it's, the Charity Commission does say their third foundation was that actually, safeguarding is the responsibility of all trustees and not just the lead. They say that the same about everything. If you've got someone who's a treasurer or chair of your finance committee or whatever, just because they have that lead, it doesn't mean that everyone else can just switch off and forget about looking after the money. Similarly, you might have somebody who's got responsibility for fundraising or for health and safety or for staffing or whatever. You've all got an equal responsibility, but you might want to sort of like, upskill someone to basically be a champion for safeguarding on the board to make sure that everyone else, they're a bit there as a bit of a sort of, a poker, poking you to make everyone think about the safeguarding responsibilities and what you need to do as a charity. And NCVO have got a quite useful description about that lead role, and actually like a very simple role description. So there's a link there. And then really, if you are going to be have contact with under 18s or adults at risk, then you need some sort of operational safeguarding lead. And that's the one where if a volunteer or a member of staff has a concern or a worry around abuse or harm for a child or an adult, that they actually talk to them about it, and that person then makes the decision as to whether to refer it on to adult social care or to children's services. Now, if you're a small charity and you don't really have that much contact with many children or adults, then your trustee could perhaps do both roles. But at some point, you probably need to separate out the two. and that very often might end up being, you know, in a charity that has quite a number of staff, that might actually be a member of staff rather than it being a volunteer or a trustee. And again, NCVO have some good guidance and role description for that. Does anybody want to ask anything about safeguarding roles?
Don't be shy.
Nope.
If you have questions for Steve, do speak up.
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. So, you know, after tonight, next steps, I would say, is, you know, share what you've thought about tonight and discuss it at a board meeting. You know, think about, well, where are our safeguarding policies and procedures? Are we missing anything? Is there something else we ought to have? And as I said, I think you should, every charity ought to appoint a lead trustee. And then maybe, as I said, you might need to discuss about having an operational lead. If you're unsure about, you know, the circumstances for your own charity, again, talk to me or Becky to give you a bit of a steer. And then make sure you've got the policies procedures to protect people from harm or abuse. So going back to that potential list I put up towards the beginning. And maybe think about whether you need an overarching policy. CAN has an overarching policy called Keeping Everyone Safe. And then because we do work with under 18s and with adults at risk, we have contact with them, then actually we have specific working with adults and working with under 18s policy. And then, you know, you need to think through whether you need simple or detailed safeguarding policies for working with adults or children. Becky and I are trying to work on a suite of different templates aimed at different organisations. They'll be available to our members on the member zone. So it's work in progress. There's some stuff already there, but it needs more work on it. So watch this space. And then thinking about training and awareness needs. And similarly, we're trying to do some work on that with the local authorities to make sure actually that there is a suite of different sort of training and awareness. And again, our intention is to put something on the membership zone of existing training and awareness stuff that's out there. Some of which is free, some of which is online, and some of which will be face-to-face. And then, of course, deciding on a reporting and review schedule. Okay. And then basically, as I said, promote your commitment to safeguarding. So let's promote that to everyone who works in your charity, you know, so your trustees, your volunteers, your staff, but then also make sure that all your users know about it and actually how they can share a concern that they might have. Okay. Do people have any questions after all that? This is the sort of your little, you know, 10 minutes worth of questions time.
I've got a question. Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
I was just wondering about project-based work. If there's a project that comes up that specifically works with children and young people, and that's for a limited period of time and outside of the usual, you know, scope of what we do. Would you implement a safeguarding policy? I guess it would be good practice, wouldn't it, to implement something?
Well, yeah, I think, yeah, if you are working, particularly if you're working with you mean with children or with adults at risk.
Yeah, I was thinking about one specifically that's for young poets, for example, and it only happens once a year, and it's an online sort of call out, but normally it's outside of the scope of People Need Nature.
Yeah. I think with any project, whenever you're looking at positive procedures, sometimes you might feel, yeah, we'll just have one for this because we just need to make people involved in this project aware. It doesn't, you know, not everyone has to know about it. But actually, yes, we'll have just a sort of like mini policy or procedure that's related to them. I think what I would say to trustees is if there's a risk, you know, even if it's just a glint in the eye, you need to, you know, recognize it and then think about, well, actually, how significant a risk is it? and therefore what sort of mitigating things will we put in place to reduce that risk happening?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you need to. It's like, I think Becky and I sometimes feel like we're insurance people. You always tell people about the worst things that can happen, and therefore you need to have all this stuff in place. It's because you can say, well, it will never happen. You know, there will be that one occasion in 1,000 that it might, and if it all goes wrong, you know, like the Charity Commission, you know, someone makes a complaint to the Charity Commission come and ask you, say, well, where's this policy? You know, why didn't the trustees recognise that this was a risk? Even though, you know, there might be a trustee meeting that said, yes, this was a risk, but actually we thought it was very, very low. Therefore, we felt there was no need to have a specific policy. Yeah, as long as it was a reasoned argument for it. Whereas sort of like if the Charity Commission just thought you were hiding, putting your head in the sand, then I think that that's not due diligence, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I have
Anyone
a quick
else?
question. The question is following on really from Matthew about a specific project, which is the first time the charity has worked with vulnerable people. So through social prescribing and this kind of work, where those people may already be in a particularly vulnerable state. And we may not have the expertise, we are not the medical people with the expertise to actually provide them with ongoing support. We are providing one-off support for them. And a bit nervous about that one because, you know, there may be, I'm a bit nervous about those of us who are involved either being too on edge about things or actually misinterpreting things. So any advice on that one?
I think, because as I said, this evening wasn't going to go into a bit more detail about working with under 18s or adults at risk, but actually, you know, when we do that, when you basically look at any policy or procedure, all our responsibility is to notify the appropriate authorities. We're not supposed to investigate or make judgments or whatever. If we feel a concern that something's not right, then we should share it with the appropriate authorities and let them decide. So I think, you know, people should feel confident that it's better to say something and it basically get told, no, that's fine, don't worry about it, rather than say, look, you know, keep silent and then something goes horribly wrong. And I think that's what I think most of the sort of safeguarding agencies are saying. It's better to say something now and then let the experts decide whether it is a serious issue or not. So I think, you know, from what you're saying, you probably need a very simple policy. You wouldn't have the expertise. You might need to decide, you know, and I'm not sure what relationship you might have with the referral agency, you know, whether you go back to the people who've referred you and say, well, actually, we've noticed this, and then let them take it forward. Or if they've just been sent to you and you have no longer any contact with the referral agency, it might be then, for instance, talking to adult social care. Now, adult social care, what's very good about adult social care is that you can ring up at the duty desk and have a conversation with them without sharing any personal information of the person involved. So they'll give you a bit of a steer about whether it's something that you need to perhaps make a formal referral or not. And that's not so well known, but actually, in fact, I've only discovered it really in the last few months that actually that existed. There's nothing on the website at all about that, but actually it is part of what they provide and offer. So you know, again, you know, have a conversation either with myself or Becky if you want to explore it in a bit more.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Cheers.
Yep.
Steve, there's a question in the chat about when we say about promoting our safeguarding culture, whether just sharing your policy on the website is enough.
Well, it would be, except it's probably going to be a bit boring, isn't it? You probably want to just have a few sort of you know, statements, you know, that actually, you know, that we are committed to blah blah blah. If you look at most policies, they sort of usually end up having a sort of a couple opening sentences sort of statement of commitment to, and then the rest it's all the detail. So you probably could just lift those opening general statements that you are committed to, you know, making sure that anyone comes into contact with our charity does not suffer any loss or harm or physical or blah 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 blah. And if you want to know more, this is where to go. So I think it's a few sort of high level bullet point statements that show your commitment and telling people where they can find out more, or maybe where they can also then make any that they can report anything that they're worried about, like your complaints procedure or talking to someone else in the organization. Okay. Right. Time to evaluate. We've got a couple of slides really about, you know, where else to get help and support from. But Becky's hopefully putting in online form for you quickly to evaluate in the chat box.
Done.
So if you could click that, it'll take you hopefully a minute or two. And as I said, there's a couple more slides with some links and places to go for advice and support.
Yeah, sorry, we'll only be maybe another 5 minutes tops, guys. Sorry, we're slightly overrun because we started a bit late. Obviously, I'll send you the feed back link in everything that's sent out as well for those of you that have had to leave. Not a problem. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Okay, shall I move on to the final few slides? So if you are working with adults and with under 18s, then there are these two there's one for under 18s that covers Dorset and BCP. There are technically two ones for adults, but they are in the process of merging. So at some point they will be called probably something else, but the links are there. And they have useful information on it, but it is sort of quite hefty. So this is for people who are working really directly with under 18s or with adults at risk. So information, resources, training. This is one of the things that Becky and I are trying to get the boards to have a bit better promotion of what training opportunities there are. But as I said, we're going to work towards at least putting something on our website with links to wherever the safeguarding boards are doing their training. So as I said, we have lots of stuff in our member zone, and talk to me or Becky. If you don't know Becky's contact details, they're there. So if you're based in Dorset Council area, then go to her rather than me. Health and Safety Executive, loads of useful stuff around health and safety. Obviously, the Information Commissioner's Office also has a lot. They have, this is obviously for data protection and GDPR UK. And the best bit is the small business site. Then I did talk about that fundraising has some issues, so the code of good practice is there. In terms of personnel, paid people, then ACAS and CIPD have loads of stuff around following the law and good practice. In terms of cybersecurity, National Cybersecurity Centre, and again has a section that's aimed at small businesses, and also actually some stuff that's aimed at charities. And then in terms of discrimination, you've got the Equality and Human Rights Commission. As I said, you know, we tend to try and distill this every week in Know Your Stuff about updating, but as I said, nearly all of them have like newsletters that you can sign up yourself. And then if you are working with under 18s and the adults, then Ofsted, if you're a regulated activity. If you're working with adult social care type stuff, then the Department of Health and Social Care has that. If you are working with children in outer school settings, so if you're doing, you know, art, craft, physical stuff, so you don't have to register with Ofsted. There is this non-statutory code of good practice that actually is good to have a look at. And there is stuff on the DBS, and earlier on there were links specifically to guidance for charities working with adults and with children. NCVO has an awful lot of stuff around safeguarding, so that's a link there to the section on safeguarding. NSPCC has a lot of stuff obviously aimed at working with children, and the Anne Craft Trust has an awful lot of stuff mostly aimed at adults. There is also a lot of stuff on the Social Care Institute for Excellence, but it's very aimed at professionals. So it depends what sort of work you're doing with children or with adults. But it's good to look at if you feel you are doing quite intensive, quite specialized therapy type work with adults or children. I think most of the people on here tonight are actually members of CAN, but you know, you get access to the member zone. You get unlimited use of Becky and I's advice and support one-to-one, and you get access to a whole lot of events and activities. So if you aren't a member, have a look at the website. It's free to join, quick and easy to do so. So if you're not, really seriously think about being one. Hopefully in the next day or two, you'll get an email from us that will include a copy of tonight's slides and a link to a recording of tonight's webinar. So that's it. Well, thank you. I know it's been a bit of a chunter the last hour, a lot to take in, but you know, hopefully when you get the slides, look at it and then start to think about actually what you need to do within your charity, a bit of a plan to make sure that actually your charity is abiding by the expectations of the Charity Commission to protect everyone who has a contact with your organisation. Anyway, thanks a lot for being here tonight, and you'll get an email soon.